On June 9, 2024, the petrodollar deal Saudi Arabia made with the United States of America ended. Saudi Arabia is expected to announce that it will cease all oil sales in US dollars, marking the end of the 50-year petrodollar pact signed on June 6, 1974. This could have a lot of massive impact on the economy of the United States and more. In today's video, we're going to be looking at an inside look at how Saudi Arabia plans to destroy the economy of the United States by choosing not to renew this petrodollar deal. Sit back and relax as we explore the impact this could have on America's economy and the world. For years, Saudi Arabia has been selling its oil only in US dollars in exchange for protection and weapons from the United States. This singular act, among others, has helped keep the dollar as the most important currency in the world. It's been like an unspoken deal between the two countries, kind of like a secret handshake. But now Saudi Arabia is starting to make moves that suggest they're ready to ditch the dollar and start doing business in other currencies. This whole thing is called the petrodollar system, and it's been around since the 1970s. Basically, it means that most of the world's oil trade has been conducted in US dollars, which has given the dollar a lot of power and influence globally. And Saudi Arabia, being one of the biggest oil producers in the world, has played a huge role in keeping this system going. But now things are shifting. Saudi Arabia is starting to look at other options, and it could mean the end of this 50-year-old petrodollar pact with the US. Can you imagine the kind of impact that could have on the global financial system? It's like a whole new world is about to unfold, and we're just sitting here watching it happen. I know it's a lot to take in, but trust me, this is some seriously interesting stuff. And it's not just about money and oil. It's also about geopolitics, power dynamics, and who's going to be calling the shots in the future. So buckle up, my friend, because I'm about to take you on a wild ride through the world of history and global finance. It's going to be a roller coaster, but I promise it'll be worth it. So back in the 1970s, the world was going through some major changes when it came to oil and money. The United States had just gone off the gold standard, which meant that the dollar was no longer backed by physical gold reserves. This created a lot of uncertainty about the stability of the dollar. At the same time, the members of OPEC, the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, were feeling pretty powerful because they had a stranglehold on the world's oil supply. They decided to take advantage of this situation and start demanding payment for their oil in US dollars. This was a smart move because it helped prop up the value of the dollar, even though it was no longer tied to gold. As long as everyone needed to buy oil from OPEC, they would need to have a steady supply of dollars on hand. Of course, the US was all too happy to go along with this arrangement because it helped maintain the dollar's status as the world's reserve currency. It was like a match made in heaven. OPEC got paid in dollars, and the US got to keep the dollar as the king of currencies. But there was one particular country that really made this whole petrodollar system work: Saudi Arabia. As one of the biggest oil producers in OPEC, Saudi Arabia played a pivotal role in ensuring that all oil transactions were conducted in US dollars. It was like a secret pact between the US and Saudi Arabia. The Saudis would keep selling their oil in dollars, and in return, the US would provide them with military support and protection. This arrangement helped solidify the dollar's dominance in global trade and finance for decades. So in a nutshell, the petrodollar system was born out of a combination of factors: the end of the gold standard, OPEC's demands for dollar payments, and Saudi Arabia's willingness to play ball with the US. It was a clever way for the US to maintain its economic and political power, even as the world shifted away from the gold standard. The world is a very different place now compared to the 1970s. When this whole petrodollar system was established. New power players have emerged, and old alliances are starting to fray at the edges. Saudi Arabia has been cozying up to some of these new players like China and Russia, and it's making the US a little uneasy. Then there are the economic motivations. Saudi Arabia has been looking to diversify its economy away from just relying on oil exports. They've been investing in all sorts of other industries, and they're starting to see that maybe it's not such a great idea to have all their eggs in the US dollar basket. By accepting other currencies for their oil, they can reduce their exposure to any potential fluctuations or weaknesses in the US dollar. Another factor is the tensions that have been brewing in the US-Saudi relationship over the past few years. There have been disagreements over issues like human rights, the war in Yemen, and even the alleged involvement of Saudi officials in the murder of journalist Jamal Khashoggi. These tensions have made Saudi Arabia a bit more hesitant to keep putting all their eggs in the US basket. But it's not just about political or economic factors. There's also a bit of pride and assertiveness at play here. Saudi Arabia wants to show the world that it's not just a puppet dancing to the tune of the United States anymore. They want to flex their muscles and show that they can make their own decisions about who they do business with and in what currency. It's like a teenager asserting their independence from their parents, but on a global scale and with way more money and oil involved. Saudi Arabia is basically saying, hey, US, we've been besties for a long time, but we're all grown up now and we're going to start making our own choices, even if you don't like it. So, whether it's geopolitics, economics, tensions, or just good old-fashioned pride, Saudi Arabia has plenty of reasons to start considering a future beyond the petrodollar pact with the United States. It's a move that could shake up the global financial system as we know it, and it's definitely worth keeping an eye on. Part 1. The implications of Saudi Arabia's shift away from the petrodollar system. First off, we have to talk about the potential impact on the global financial system and the US dollar's dominance. For decades, the petrodollar system has been one of the main pillars propping up the dollar's status as the world's reserve currency. If Saudi Arabia starts accepting other currencies for their oil, it could be a serious blow to the dollar's supremacy. Think about it this way. If you're a country that needs to buy oil, you're going to need to have a stockpile of whatever currency the oil producers are demanding. So if Saudi Arabia starts accepting, say, the Chinese yuan or the Russian ruble, those currencies could start to gain more traction on the global stage. And let's not forget about the energy market and oil trade. If the Saudis ditch the dollar, it could create a ripple effect throughout the entire industry. Prices could become more volatile and there might be some serious reshuffling in terms of who holds the most power and influence in the oil game. But the implications go beyond just finance and energy. There are also some serious geopolitical implications to consider. The petrodollar system has been a key component of US influence and leverage in the Middle East for decades. If that system starts to crumble, it could shift the balance of power in the region and potentially undermine the US's ability to project its influence there. Imagine a scenario where Saudi Arabia starts cozying up to China or Russia, accepting their currencies for oil and cutting the US out of the loop. That could have some major ripple effects in terms of global alliances and power dynamics. Of course, there are still plenty of challenges and uncertainties surrounding this whole situation, but the potential implications are huge. We could be looking at a complete reshaping of the global financial order, a realignment of alliances, and a shift in who gets to call the shots on the world stage. It's like a giant game of musical chairs, but instead of chairs, we're talking about global economic and political dominance. And Saudi Arabia's move to step away from the petrodollar system could be the signal that the music is about to stop. Part 2. The challenges and uncertainties surrounding Saudi Arabia's potential move. First up, we have to consider the obstacles to actually transitioning away from the well-established petrodollar system. This isn't just some small change we're talking about. It's a seismic shift in the way the global energy market and financial system have operated for decades. Think about it. The US dollar is deeply entrenched in pretty much every aspect of the oil trade, from contracts and pricing to banking and settlements. Untangling all of that and setting up new systems and mechanisms for trading oil in other currencies is going to be a massive undertaking. Not to mention, Saudi Arabia would need to find willing partners who are ready and able to conduct these transactions in different currencies at the same massive scale. It's not as simple as just saying, okay, we'll take yuan now instead of dollars. They need to ensure there's enough liquidity and infrastructure in place to handle the shift. Then there's the question of how the United States might respond to this move. You can bet your bottom dollar, pun intended, that the US isn't just going to sit back and let Saudi Arabia dismantle the petrodollar system without putting up a fight. We could see some serious economic and political pressure being applied, or perhaps even the threat of sanctions or other retaliatory measures. The US has a lot of leverage, and they're not going to give up their dominant position without a struggle. And let's not forget about the other major players in this game. Countries like China and Russia, who would likely be more than happy to see the US dollar's dominance diminished. They could try to swoop in and offer alternative arrangements to Saudi Arabia, potentially creating new economic blocs and realigning global alliances. It's a complex web of geopolitical and economic interests at play, and there's no telling how it might all unfold. Will Saudi Arabia face major pushback and obstacles that make the transition too difficult? Will the US find a way to reassert its control and maintain the status quo? Or will we see a complete reshuffling of the global order? Only time will tell, but one thing's for sure, this isn't going to be a smooth or straightforward process. There are plenty of challenges and uncertainties standing in the way of Saudi Arabia's potential move away from the petrodollar system, and it's going to be a fascinating and possibly messy ride. Part 3. Future Scenarios. First up, we could see the emergence of alternative monetary systems and new reserve currencies. If the US dollar loses its stranglehold on the global energy market, other currencies like the Chinese yuan or the Russian ruble could step in to fill the void. Imagine a world where oil is priced and traded in a basket of different currencies, or even a new digital currency specifically designed for the energy trade. It would be a massive shift from the dollar-dominated system we've been living with for decades. And speaking of shifts, we might also see the formation of new economic blocs and a realignment of global alliances. Countries that have been traditionally aligned with the US might start hedging their bets and cozying up to the new power players. For example, let's say Saudi Arabia starts accepting the yuan for its oil exports. You can bet that China would be more than happy to strengthen its ties with the kingdom, offering economic incentives and perhaps even military cooperation. That could drive a wedge between Saudi Arabia and its longtime ally, the United States. On the flip side, we could see a doubling down on existing alliances, with the US and its partners banding together to try and maintain the status quo. They might work to undermine any alternative systems or put pressure on countries that stray from the petrodollar fold. It's like the beginnings of a new Cold War, but instead of East versus West, it's dollar versus non-dollar blocs vying for global dominance. And let's not forget the potential long-term implications for global trade and financial stability. If we do see a fragmentation of the monetary system and a decline in the dollar's dominance, it could lead to increased volatility and uncertainty in markets around the world. Suddenly, companies and investors would have to navigate a much more complex web of currencies and payment systems, which could make international business and trade a whole lot trickier. Of course, these are just some hypothetical scenarios. The reality could play out in countless different ways. But one thing is clear. If Saudi Arabia does follow through on abandoning the petrodollar system, it's going to send shockwaves through the global economy and geopolitical landscape. It's like watching tectonic plates shift. You know something big is happening, but it's hard to predict exactly where the fault lines will appear and what the long-term consequences will be. Buckle up, folks, because it's going to be one heck of a ride. All right. Let's wrap this up with a solid conclusion on Saudi Arabia's potential shift away from the petrodollar system. To summarize the key points we've covered, the petrodollar system has been the backbone of the global financial order for decades, with Saudi Arabia playing a pivotal role in enforcing the dollar's dominance in oil trade. However, changing geopolitical dynamics, economic pressures, and tensions with the US have pushed Saudi Arabia to explore alternative options beyond the petrodollar pact. A move away from the dollar could have massive implications, undermining the US currency's global reserve status, reshaping energy markets, and triggering realignments of international alliances and power blocs. However, such a transition is fraught with challenges, from technical hurdles to potential US retaliation and competing interests of other major powers like China and Russia. Possible future scenarios range from a more multipolar world with new reserve currencies to increased economic fragmentation and volatility as the monetary landscape shifts. As you can see, my friend, this is a complex and high-stakes situation with the potential to reshape the entire global order as we know it. It's not just about Saudi Arabia and the US. It's about the very fabric of how nations interact, trade, and wield influence in the 21st century. In many ways, the petrodollar system has been a cornerstone of American economic and geopolitical dominance for the past 50 years. Losing that leverage could significantly diminish the US's standing on the world stage and open the door for rising powers like China to assert themselves more forcefully. At the same time, the transition to a more multipolar financial system could also create new opportunities for smaller nations and regional blocs to gain more autonomy and bargaining power. No longer beholden to the whims of a single reserve currency, they might be able to chart their own economic courses more freely. Ultimately, while the end of the petrodollar pact might seem like a symbolic shift, its ripple effects could be profound and far-reaching. It's a stark reminder that in our increasingly interconnected world, the decisions of a few key players can have cascading consequences for everyone else. So keep your eyes peeled, my friend, because this saga is far from over. The tides are shifting, and the global landscape we've grown accustomed to might be due for a major facelift.